Does that make sense? It's really powerful once we get past the image, or once we understand the image. It's very powerful, but until we understand the image, it can maybe seem a little bit obscure. So moving on to the prophet Zephaniah, we only have 3 chapters in the book of the prophet Zephaniah, kind of like we did with Habakkuk, and kind of like we did with Nahum and Joel. That all these minor prophets, not all of them, but few of them, only have 3 chapters. What is going on with Zephaniah? Okay, remember when Josiah was the king. Remember, Josiah was the young king who restored worship in the kingdom of Judah. So this is Zephaniah prophesying shortly before those religious reforms of Josiah, maybe about the year 630 BC. And so that's just kind of important, that is very important for us to understand. Here's the context. He even says it, the very first verse. But Zephaniah has basically 3 accusations against the people of the kingdom of Judah. Sorry, did I say 3? 5 accusations against the kingdom of Judah in chapter 1. And he also has 5 accusations later on. But the 5 accusations that we heard today are the people of Judah have fallen into A, idolatry. B, they have failed to grow in prayer and closeness with the Lord. C, or let's number them. 1, idolatry. 2, they failed to pray. 3, they have bad leaders, and those bad leaders have been a bad representative of how we are called to walk with the Lord. And 4, they've been superstitious. And 5, they believe that there's no actual judgment coming upon them and for their actions. And you can see this in chapter 1. It's very, very clear. In chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. It talks about those who I'll cut off from this place, the remnant of Baal and the name of the idolatrous priests, those who bow down on roofs, bow down to the hosts of heaven, and they bow down and swear to the Lord, and they also swear to Milcom. So I'm going to stretch my hand out against them because they've committed idolatry. And then in verse 6, he talks about those who have turned back from following the Lord, who do not seek the Lord or inquire of him. This is really important because it talks about, again, in that case, talks about you haven't prayed to me. You haven't sought my counsel. You haven't looked to me for wisdom. You haven't looked to me for that intimacy in prayer. The third being bad leaders. It talks about those, I'll punish the officials and the king's sons who clothe themselves in foreign attire. And that's so interesting. They clothe themselves in foreign attire, meaning they want to look like all the other nations. Remember, one of the big calls for God's people is you're going to have to look different, right? Remember the laws of Leviticus that talked about, okay, you're eating differently, you're dressing differently, you're cutting your hair differently. All these things are meant to mark you out, to live as my people. But here, all the officials, the king's sons, they clothe themselves in foreign attire. And that is basically, you're saying, I don't want to belong to the Lord. I want to look like everyone else. Now, this 4th accusation is really interesting because it says, on that day I will punish everyone who leaps over the threshold. I said it was superstition. And that's a very great possibility. One of the commentaries I was looking at, or many of the commentaries I was comparing a few, it says, those who leap over the threshold, what is that? Well, some think that it could be a reference to 1 Samuel, where the idol Dagon, remember that idol of Dagon, where they brought the Ark of the Covenant and put it in the same place as the idol to the god Dagon, and it kept falling on its face? Well, one of the theories is that because that idol fell down, it fell on the threshold of that temple to Dagon, that people then would jump over the threshold because that's where their idol fell. And maybe that's an allusion to 1 Samuel chapter 5. I don't know. But apparently in the Middle East at that time, there was an idea that thresholds to buildings were sacred and were kind of basically some superstition there, where you wouldn't step over the threshold. It was considered bad luck to simply step over the threshold. You'd leap over the threshold. And so there's Zephaniah who's pointing out this, basically people are saying, that you rub the rabbit's feet, or you don't walk under ladders, or something like this. Basically, you're placing your faith in a superstition, and the local superstition at the time, or at least localized superstition at the time, was leaping over thresholds instead of simply stepping over thresholds, which is, I think, funny, but at the same time is kind of also relevant for us as well, who might have little superstitions that we allow to be in our lives that might take away from our trust in the Lord. And lastly, so first, idolatry. Second, prayer. They're avoiding prayer, avoiding listening to the Lord. Third, bad leaders. Fourth, superstitions. And then fifth this is so interesting. This is in verse 12. It says, at that time I will search Jerusalem with lamps, and I will punish the men who are thickening on their dregs, those who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good, nor will he do ill. So this is people who do not believe the Lord will actually judge their actions. And there's something so interesting. All 5 of these indictments, and there are going to be another 5 in chapter 3 of Zephaniah, but all 5 of these accusations, all 5 of these indictments, they're not simply surface indictments. They actually go to the heart of relationship. Because how can I belong to the Lord if I keep giving my heart to other idols? How can I actually be in relationship with the Lord if I don't actually seek his voice and spend time in prayer? How can I belong to the Lord if those who are leading us, and I'm acting like those leaders, are dressing like people who don't even belong to the Lord? They want to fit in. They want to look like everyone else. How can I belong to the Lord if I'm acting out these superstitions of the pagan people around me? And how can I belong to the Lord if I don't actually think that he is real and he's present and he's active in my life? And that's just so important. Now, chapter 2 talks about how God will have judgment on Israel's enemies. And he names 5 different kinds of people: the Philistines, the Moabites, Ethiopians, and the Assyrians. But there is a powerful moment where God says, yeah, the day of the Lord is going to be coming. And pray that perhaps, seek righteousness. This is verse 3 of chapter 2. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land who do his commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you may be hidden on the day of the wrath of the Lord. Basically, he's saying the wrath of the Lord, the day of the wrath of the Lord, the day of the Lord is going to come. So you're going to still have to endure it. But if you seek the Lord, you do his commands, you seek righteousness, seek humility, perhaps you may be hidden when that day comes. Because at the end of chapter 2, and again, going into chapter 3, this is what you find when it comes to every one of the prophets, right? They're promising not only here's correction, here's God's justice, but also here's God's promise of restoration. He says in chapter 2, Judah, the remnant of my people, shall plunder them, and the survivors of my nation shall possess them, meaning the enemies, that there shall be, even though there's judgment coming, even though there's a justice coming, there will be a remnant. And that remnant will be victorious. That remnant will experience God's promise and God's goodness. And this is so important for us because we also are waiting, right? We also are facing enemies. We're also facing the battle of the spiritual battle between dark and light, between God and the powers and principalities of this earth. And so we're waiting like the people of Israel did in Zephaniah's day and Isaiah's day. And our call is, as we wait for the day of the Lord, that we seek justice and we seek righteousness and we seek the Lord with everything we have. That's the message of Zephaniah and all of the prophets. And that's the message today, that no matter what happens, no matter what kind of day we have, that we can use this day to seek the Lord with all our hearts. And that's what we're doing right now, is we're listening to his word for the last half an hour. My gosh, you guys, this is a long one. I apologize for that. But I want you to know I am praying for you and want you to ask, please pray for me. My name is Father Mike. I cannot wait to see you tomorrow. God bless.